ladies and gentlemen. Bob Keel here. Tonight, we have more news on the Zodiac Killer.
Hey, fellas, hold it down. I want to hear this.
He writes another letter to the papers. And I quote, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over on Washington and Maple Street. They could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their squad car."
I should be put away, but I'm still loose, aren't I?
Zodiac, a symbol that now stands for terror in San Francisco. Today there was a possibly significant development in the terrifying case of the man who calls himself Zodiac and has boasted that he is responsible for 5 murders in the last 9 months.
The 1971 film, The Zodiac Killer, occupies a strange, almost forgotten corner of American cinema. Not because it was especially good or especially bad, but because it attempted something no studio probably should have. It treated a theatrical release as a trap. This was not a retrospective crime story. The Zodiac was still free, still writing letters, still shaping his own legend. Rather than waiting for history to settle, the film tried to intervene in it. Long before podcasts, message boards, and streaming documentaries promised to reopen cold cases, the Zodiac Killer film attempted the same thing using nothing more than grindhouse theaters. The film positioned itself as both entertainment and intervention, inviting the public to believe that collective attention could succeed where law enforcement had failed. More than 50 years later, the logic remains familiar, and just as bizarre. By examining the film The Zodiac Killer, we explore how the desire to solve real crimes through storytelling often serves the myth of the killer more than the pursuit of truth. The Zodiac Killer was the first film to portray any version of the ongoing Zodiac case, dramatizing events that were still unfolding in real life. Unlike most crime films, which reconstruct crimes after the fact, this movie attempted to operate in real time, blending dramatization with a bizarrely ambitious public intervention. With the help of Paul Avery, the San Francisco Chronicle columnist most active in covering the Zodiac at the time, it not only depicted the murders and the mystery of the Zodiac, but also sought to turn its audience into participants, using contests and screenings to lure the killer into revealing himself. The horror of the real Zodiac began quietly. On December 20th, 1968, 2 teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, parked along Lake Herman Road near Benicia, California. Sometime after 11 p.m., someone approached their car and opened fire. Jensen was killed while fleeing. Faraday was shot at close range inside the vehicle. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, and no obvious suspect. At first, the murders were treated as a tragic but isolated act of violence. 6 months later, another young couple parked at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo were attacked. Shortly after midnight, a man approached their car with a flashlight. Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau assumed he was a police officer. Instead, he shot them both. Farron died from her injuries. Mageau survived long enough to describe the attacker as a stocky white male, but the details were vague. Then, the phone rang. About an hour after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone just blocks away. In a calm, almost bored voice, he reported the crime and claimed responsibility, not only for the Blue Rock Springs attack, but for the Lake Herman Road murders as well. He ended the call simply, "I also killed those kids last year." Then he hung up. The killings were no longer random. They were connected. Weeks after the phone call, 3 Bay Area newspapers received letters from someone calling himself the Zodiac. Each letter included part of a cipher and a demand for front-page publication. The killer had shifted from anonymous murderer to self-styled mastermind, taunting authorities and manipulating the press. When a cipher was solved, it revealed chilling boasts about killing for pleasure, but not his identity. The attacks escalated. In September 1969, a masked man stabbed 2 college students at Lake Berryessa, leaving behind his now infamous crosshair symbol. In October, a San Francisco cab driver, Paul Stein, was shot in Presidio Heights. The killer mailed a piece of the driver's blood-stained shirt to a newspaper as proof. With each letter and cryptogram, Zodiac tightened his grip on public attention. By 1970, the case had become inseparable from the media spectacle surrounding it. The Zodiac dictated headlines, threatened schoolchildren, and claimed additional victims. He remained unidentified, but his presence dominated Northern California. When the letters slowed, the fear did not. The killer was still free. It was into this unresolved, media-saturated atmosphere that the film The Zodiac Killer was released, a film made not in hindsight, but in the middle of the storm. Tom Hanson's The Zodiac Killer structures its portrait of the infamous murderer in 2 distinct chapters. The first follows Grover, a disgruntled truck driver unraveling after losing custody of his daughter. In the midst of a psychological collapse, he takes the child hostage and claims to be the Zodiac, clearly inspired by the media frenzy surrounding the real case. His violent standoff with police ends in his death, framing the Zodiac not just as a killer but as a cultural contagion, an identity so powerful it can be adopted by the unstable and desperate. The second chapter shifts to a man implied to be the real Zodiac, an unassuming postal worker who secretly worships Satan and embarks on his own killing spree after hearing of Grover's demise. Unlike the first section, which examines imitation and hysteria, this portion attempts to peer inside the mind of the supposed killer. In its final act, the film offers a crude psychological motive. The Zodiac visits his father in a hospital, where the older man is confined in a cage-like room, restrained and unresponsive. Rejected and humiliated, the son leaves in a rage, lashing out violently at patients in the facility, an implication that neglect and inherited madness birthed the monster. The film concludes with a chilling voiceover as the Zodiac resumes his ordinary routine. He boasts that he will never be caught and warns the audience that others like him walk among them, monsters who blend seamlessly into everyday life. The message is clear. The true horror is not spectacle, but invisibility. The movie itself is not good. It is cheaply made, awkwardly acted, and structurally confused. A piece of regional schlock that would have disappeared entirely were it not attached to a real monster. What makes the movie fascinating is not what appears on screen, but the strange crusade that brought it into existence. The driving force behind the film was not a seasoned producer or an exploitation mogul, but Tom Hanson, a Bay Area entrepreneur who owned a small chain of Pizza Man restaurants. Hanson reportedly financed much of the film himself, pouring roughly $13,000 into a project that was less about art than confrontation. His stated goal was not simply to dramatize the crimes or capitalize on public fear. He believed he could catch the Zodiac Killer. Premiering it in Northern California, in the very region the Zodiac had terrorized, was exploitative but predictable. What separated Hanson's project from countless other grindhouse productions was the promotional strategy. At the film's premiere on April 7, 1971, at San Francisco's RKO Golden Gate Theater, Hanson attempted to turn the screening itself into a trap. Relying on the Zodiac's supposed ego and craving for attention, Hanson offered a Kawasaki motorcycle as a door prize to draw a large audience. Attendees were asked to answer a simple prompt in writing. I think the Zodiac kills because... The cards were collected and examined by a team tasked with comparing the handwriting to known Zodiac letters. Hanson even arranged for men to be on standby, ready to apprehend anyone whose writing or behavior matched the infamous communications. On one night, a yellow card appeared in the submission box bearing only 4 words. I was here, the Zodiac. Whether it was a prank or something more sinister, It validated Hanson's central assumption that the killer might be tempted to engage. The screenings continued, each one doubling as both publicity stunt and amateur sting operation. At another showing, Hanson later claimed he believed he had found his man. In a theater restroom, a stranger allegedly remarked that the blood in the film did not look realistic. Real blood doesn't come out like that. When the man turned around, Hanson thought he resembled a Zodiac police sketch. Hanson's associates briefly detained him, but the suspect calmly defused the situation, speaking about Vietnam and carrying himself without fear or anger. He was released. If it was the Zodiac, he slipped away again. If it wasn't, the incident still revealed the volatility of Hanson's experiment. What makes this story compelling is not whether Hanson truly believed he could catch the Zodiac, but what that belief says about the era. The trap was built on a fundamental misunderstanding, that a man who controlled his own myth through letters and ciphers would surrender control simply to correct a movie. In trying to outsmart the Zodiac through attention, Hanson may have been playing directly into the killer's hands. Hanson's trap was built on a simple psychological theory, that the Zodiac killer's ego would betray him. The killer had written letters, demanded front-page coverage, and carefully cultivated a persona. Surely a public portrayal of his crimes, especially one that attempted to explain his motives, would provoke him into responding. But this assumption misunderstood the very dynamic that had allowed the Zodiac to thrive. The Zodiac did not seek exposure in the conventional sense. He sought control. His letters dictated when fear spiked and when it subsided. He revealed just enough information to prove authenticity, but never enough to identify himself. He taunted police because he remained invisible. A movie screening, by contrast, required physical presence. It required proximity. It demanded that the killer step into a space he did not fully command. If Zodiac attended a screening, and it is entirely possible that he did, he would not have needed to submit handwriting or claim a prize. Simply sitting in the audience would have been enough. The power lay not in participation, but in observation. Hanson imagined a killer compelled to correct inaccuracies. The reality was far more chilling. A killer who understood that his silence in that moment preserved the myth better than confrontation ever could. In that sense, the stunt reveals something larger than one man's ambition. It exposes a recurring cultural belief that attention is a weapon, that by shining enough light on darkness, it will retreat. Yet in cases like Zodiac, attention was never the enemy. It was the fuel. The screenings did not catch a murderer. They reinforced his legend. In the end, the 1971 film, The Zodiac Killer, did not catch a murderer. It did something stranger. It revealed how badly the public wanted to believe that attention could function as justice. Tom Hanson's experiment was built on optimism disguised as spectacle. The idea that ego could be baited, that myth could be punctured, that a man who had manipulated newspapers and police might slip because he could not resist seeing himself on screen. But Zodiac's power was never just in killing. It was in understanding that mystery is more durable than revelation. The film attempted to force him into the light, yet light was never the threat. Exposure did not weaken the legend, it expanded it. Every headline, every cipher, every dramatization, including Hanson's, added another layer to a persona designed to outlive the crimes themselves. More than 50 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. The letters are still dissected, the ciphers are still debated, and the cultural machinery that Hanson tried to harness has only grown more powerful. Podcasts promise breakthroughs, documentaries suggest hidden suspects, online communities pore over decades-old evidence. The belief persists that collective attention might succeed where institutions failed. The 1971 film stands as an early, almost naive prototype of that belief. It was a low-budget film with an outsized ambition. to transform spectators into detectives and spectacle into a snare. It failed, but in failing, it exposed a truth that still lingers. Some criminals are not undone by visibility. They are sustained by it. The more we attempt to solve them through narrative, the more firmly they entrench themselves in cultural memory. The trap never worked because it misunderstood the game. Zodiac did not want to be caught. He wanted to be remembered. And in that respect, he was.